Hey yo, I am the star in any room that I stand in. I am the standout, you just my stand-in. These bitches copy my homework, that's what they hand in. That's why I'm private like the airports I land in. Life is a beach house, don't let the sand in. I ball in any arena, go let the fans in.
I've wanted so desperately to apologize every day to darker skinned actresses, to say, I'm sorry that I'm the one chosen. My mama looks like you. My mum looks like you. And it's been very painful to have women that look like my mum feel like I'm not representing them, that I'm taking from them, taking their men, taking their work, taking their truth. I didn't mean to. Women of color who, whether they're pale or whatever, who've managed to help other actors, you know, get into this business. We matter. I was worried about my light-skinnedness because my light-skinnedness has been more problematic than being black. Is being light-skinned has been way more problematic than being black in my life. Literally, I was black in England. I mean, dark-skinned. And so then I went to America and I was dark-skinned. I thought I was dark-skinned and I would describe myself as dark-skinned. It's like, you're light-skinned. And suddenly I was someone that, you know, you for being light-skinned. I got more prejudice from black people. I didn't understand. I literally didn't understand. I thought, you're my brethren, what's happening? So interestingly, I now realize that my, internalized prejudice was stopping me from feeling like I could play this role, when it's precisely that prejudice that I've received. It doesn't matter that it's from African-American women more than anyone else. It doesn't matter. I received prejudice. Anyone who's received oppression and prejudice feels this character, right? So it's actually, I love the fact that I overcame that. And it was these guys going, you're the one. I just thank God that my light skin didn't stop that from happening. I'm so, you know, that it didn't cause more pain. You know, sorry, I hadn't actually made that connection before for me as a woman, that one of the reasons why it's so painful to be distrusted by African-American women, darker skin than me, and they look like my mum.
What's up, y'all? I hope all is well. So in this video, I want to do some commentary in response to a topic suggestion that was left by a supporter of mine. So shout out to sweet girl. You've left a lot of great comments under my video, so I appreciate your support. And she recommended that I do a video in response to the Tandie Newton situation, and she thought that it would be interesting for us to revisit it on the channel, and I actually agree. I wanted to do some content about it at the time, but I think it was just too much going on, and you know, I had a lot going on in my life at that time. But I'm happy to revisit it, and I'm always happy to revisit some old situations that have went viral in the past. I'm not afraid to talk about something that's not quote unquote viral. It is what it is. Let me know. So if you guys are ever interested in revisiting a situation, doesn't have to be on the internet, can be from past, present, whenever, just comment, let me know, or drop me an email, and my email is always linked in the description box below. But anyway, so under my video about Tandie Newton's daughter being dragged by white people for playing a fictional character, sweet girl left a comment, and she said, I would love to see a video from you about the Tandie Newton thing, because people being mad over that was so crazy to me. Also, I like that you pointed out that people don't respect mixed people's backgrounds, especially MGM people. It really annoys me when people who simply do not understand try to categorize us or force us into one group. I came from several generations of mixed people due to me being Creole, and people always try to tell me we're simply black and then turn around and call us mulattoes or quadroons when they don't like us. LOL, so true. And so I definitely feel like there are a lot of connections between Sweet Sweet Girl's original comments and the Tandie Newton situation just in general, especially when it comes to misunderstanding. And I feel like in a sense people intentionally misinterpreting what mixed and light skinned women are trying to say when we speak on these types of things. I feel like when you're mixed or light skinned, you really have to walk on eggshells when it comes to talking about colorism or race, or not so much race as long as you have the right narrative and you're on code with every other black person. Then people don't have an issue with what you're saying. But if you're not on code and you're a light skinned woman like me who has their own free thought, then people don't really like that. So you always kind of have to walk on eggshells. You're always like treading a slippery slope and treading lightly. And my initial feelings when this situation came out, when I first saw the clip, I remember I saw it in the shade room, and I was already scared for her because I knew that the backlash was coming. I knew that the lashing was going to be swift, because I knew how they were going to react to what she said, even though I don't think what she said was anything wrong or anything bad. I think she was actually being very vulnerable, but I knew how it was going to be perceived. I also think some of this could have been a cultural difference in understanding as well, because I feel like she was being very vulnerable, and culturally black Americans, they don't really, and this is in general, but I just have noticed this specifically when it comes to like these skin tone politics conversations. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't feel like black America, no matter what ethnic group people descend from, culturally in America, they don't really take well to light skinned people being very emotionally vulnerable in those situations, or kind of being very like very transparent with their emotions. I've noticed that that's not really approach that people really take kindly to, and you would think that people would appreciate the vulnerability, but unfortunately to me, I perceive it as like people perceiving it as kindness being weakness, to be honest. Like, which is a kind of an issue, because if people are trying to be vulnerable with you, or they're trying to be explanatory with you, or they're just telling you your experience, then it's not fair for you to automatically jump down their throat or get angry at them. And I not recently came to the conclusion, but I kind of finally acknowledged to myself and finally understood that the reason why a lot of other light skinned and mixed people don't like talking about race, and this is true for Latin people across the board, no matter their racial makeup, it, if they're mixed, which most people are, then the reason why a lot of like Hispanic people do not like to talk about race in the American context, and why like a lot of light skinned and mixed people don't like to talk about race in the just in general, is because like it's kind of like you kind of know you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, and you're kind of people, that if you honestly give your honest opinions of how you feel about stuff, you're always going to be left in a situation where you're kind of saying the wrong thing to somebody, and so it's going to always kind of be somebody that's either offended or personalized the statement, or interjects into it, their own understandings of what you're trying to say. It's very uncomfortable having that conversation as a mixed and light skinned person. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I also started my channel, because I know it's like people try to like maybe trivialize these topics, or what we discuss when we discuss our experience as light skinned people, or why light skinned people will start making content in this way. But that's because number one, they're very specific narratives about us. So we have a right to respond. So that's the first thing. But also one thing that I've really noticed, and I actually learned this and I observed this from my family. And it really irritated me how I kind of felt like my family never talked about race, and they would say positive things about blackness. Like they taught me about like black history, and like things like that, and like will buy me like black characters and books like that and things, but they never really talked about race. They never really got deep into the whole mix thing. They even taught me about like my indigenous heritage. That's how I was really raised, to see myself as like black and indigenous, but you know, I have mostly European ancestry, and they kind of would touch on that, but they never went deep or really like decompressed that, or like really talked about mixedness, or really like engaged me with that identity. It was just kind of mentioned, and then life just kind of moved on. You know what I mean? I didn't really get any really guidance in that. So, you know, I didn't really see until I got older that like other people of African descent, I do feel like brown skin and dark skin people, I do feel like they really have like like they really kind of talk to their kids more in that way, and like kind of prepare them for certain stuff, or tell them certain stuff in a way that I feel like people that are like light skin or mixed, they don't talk about it because it makes them uncomfortable, and they don't really have the tools themselves to navigate those conversations, or to teach their kids stuff, so they don't teach their kids stuff either. So then you go in the world and you got people asking you, oh, what are you mixed with, or what race are you? And you're like, I'm just light skinned, I'm just Hispanic. Like, you know, you don't know what to say because you wasn't taught, you know, that. You was just taught what you were, or it probably wasn't talked about at all. That's what I found. A lot of mixed light skinned people don't talk about race with their kids at all, or skin tone. But anyway, that's a story for another day. But I just realized, I was like, oh wow, that's why. Like, the reason why they don't is because it's uncomfortable, and it's really difficult to feel like you're telling people the quote unquote right answer, or you're saying the quote unquote right thing, because your perspective of race or your lived experience is 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10, whatever, more than likely not what the average person has experienced. So it might be hard for them to relate to you or even be empathetic. So anyway, that long drawn out intro, bringing it back to Tandie Newton, I kind of feel like that's what happened in this situation. You know, I feel like she was really trying to be vulnerable about how she felt, and like where she was coming from with things, and some of the, you know, identity or skin tone issues that she's grappled with, and just to see how she was dragged, I felt really bad for her, because I already knew what the response was going to be, and she was being vulnerable. And I also think that, you know, it was one of those moments where like I thought it was really interesting how she was doing that interview with like 4 white guys. Like this was like some European like film YouTube channel or something, you know what I mean, that's really obscure. And you know, clearly some black person, and because the white people do not care about these conversations despite what y'all say, somebody filmed it and sent it to the shade room or something, and it went viral. But I think that she was just being vulnerable. She was just talking, and then she just kind of got caught up. So I feel kind of bad for her in that sense, because I don't feel like she said anything wrong. And this the reaction that came from it, if y'all remember that time 2 years ago, like the level of vitriol and the reaction that came from it, and how like mad people got, was really interesting to me. And I also felt like, I wonder if Tandie Newton felt that comfortable being that vulnerable and saying how she really felt, because she was talking around to white people, specifically white men. I'm just gonna be honest with you. Sometimes it can be easier to talk to non-black men about stuff. That's something I will say. I do like dating non-black men for that reason, because they kind of have like a neutral stance in that regard on certain stuff, like as a black woman. So sometimes you can tell them stuff that you've experienced, and they can look at it in a very objective way, as where like if you talk to another black woman about it, or you talk to like a black guy or something, it's like they have their own biases, you know. Because quiet as is kept, I know y'all like to think that, but black men are not always automatically on light skinned women's side, or automatically, you know, give us the benefit of the doubt, automatically fuck with us. That's not always the case. You know what I mean? You got to be a black male worshiper and not be too full. You got to be a very specific archetype for black men to actually fuck with you like that. And it's always performative also, or surface level, in the point where what can you do for me. Not saying other groups of men are not like that too, but that's a whole different other conversation. But anyway, but and I'm gonna get back to the dating non-black men thing in a moment, because that intersects with this conversation. But anyway, I'm gonna be honest with you. I do kind of feel like she could have been more comfortable, you know, really being more honest, and like she kind of was like kind of talking and going with the flow, and not like checking her words in a way. I wonder, because she was in that setting, Because I'm just going to be honest with you, sometimes it can be, yeah, like I said, more comfortable to talk to non-black people about certain stuff you experience because they're looking from the outside looking in, as where you know that if you was to say that to other people of African descent, even other mixed people, they will get mad defensive. They will try to talk you down, make you feel guilty for what you're saying. Like, even amongst other mixed and light-skinned people, you still can't even have these like very vulnerable conversations or keep it 100 with people a lot of times because they will make you feel guilty for how you feel, or they will simply just gaslight you and stuff like that. So sometimes it is easier to just talk to non-black people. So I wonder if she had just felt a little bit more comfortable. And it's just like, listen, look, this is how look how the reaction was, though. I'm not saying like, oh, I'm not saying like, oh, they, you deserve it because this is how you act or whatever. But, if she is saying like, if this was her experience, I just find it ironic that she was saying that that's her experience with a lot of black women, unfortunately. And then like, y'all didn't really prove her incorrect either, because people came at her with a lot of vitriol when what she said wasn't really that deep. Like, yeah, some people in America, in how the black American culture is, they might perceive her what she said as as being weak, and like try to make fun of her about that. That's how I interpreted a lot of it, since they perceived it as like her being like kind of being fake because she was being vulnerable. Even if you're being like that, or she's not even saying anything disrespectful, even if she is trying to quote unquote kiss up, if that's what you think, people still came at her with mad vitriol when it wasn't that serious, in my opinion. So to me, people didn't really disprove what she was saying. Like, and I'm gonna be honest with you, there are times in my life when I would hear, sometimes other mixed people's experience with other black women, and I'd be like, dang, like, is it really like that? Is that, is stuff really, do people really act like that? Because that hadn't necessarily been my experience for a long time. And then I got online and I seen some of the rhetoric that people were saying, specifically about biracial people, and I'm like, dang, well, I mean, the evidence is not showing that they're 100% lying about what they're being said. So I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't always have this perception of, like light-skinned people's experiences and like being mixed and things like that. I was definitely very brainwashed and very conditioned for a long time in my life, and definitely had a lot of like quote unquote light-skinned guilt, as people would say. So there was definitely time in my life when I would have probably not taken Tandie Newton seriously, or maybe I would have thought, maybe she should have phrased it differently. I might have been more critical of her in the past because I was still I was still under the brainwashing. But in my opinion, what she said was never that deep. But yeah, when you are under that mindset, anything that light-skinned women say is called for scrutiny, no matter how it's being said. So I think that that's part of it as well. It's like, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like what I said, going back to, it's like anything you say is kind of going to be a problem. And before I start really responding to like the contents of what she really said, one thing I really noticed was that another thing is that no matter how vulnerable or what type of emotion you're invoking with your conversation, with your tone, or with your point, no matter if you're trying to invoke sympathy, if you're trying to invoke empathy, understanding, extend an olive branch, whatever, I notice it's often interpreted as, oh, you think you're better, or you think that I'm below you, and so you pity me, so you saying this to me because you feel bad for me. And that also makes things frustrating, because when you're trying to be vulnerable, if somebody, and this is gonna sound mean, or not mean, but this is gonna sound harsh, but I just have to be honest with you. If somebody already has an insecurity about something, no matter how much you try to apologize for maybe triggering that insecurity, or maybe making them or whatever, you feel guilty about it, you can't apologize about that, because it's not going to help, because the insecurity is an internal thing. So you can't apologize for how somebody feels internally, because it's really beyond you. You can't really internalize it. And unfortunately, I feel like Tandie Newton had internalized a lot of the stuff she's experienced. And unfortunately, you're going to be very frustrated, and also take things very personal, and also, be very emotionally distraught a lot if you personalize a lot of this stuff, and you take it in the sense that, if you just personalize it, I feel like you're just going to have a difficult time, because a lot of it is internal. So it's like, you can't apologize for something that somebody has to make a decision to, change their mindset about. So if somebody feels some type of way already about you towards something, already has been taught to believe that you think you're better, you believe yourself to be a certain way, it doesn't matter what you say to try to disprove them or to try to say that that's not true. It's up to them to change their mindset, because in a way it shows that you're a pick me. And I think that a lot of light skinned people are pick me's, and unfortunately they're pick me's because they want acceptance and validation. It's the same reason that women pick me's are pick me's, because they want assurance and validation from men, or to be chosen, or to be told that they're better than men. Now, I don't think Tandie Newton is the type of light skinned woman in the sense that she wants to be quote unquote the chosen light skinned person, or wants to be, the token or the favorite or whatever. I don't get that vibe. But I do get it in the sense that I do feel like she really is still at a point in her life where she still feels like she needs that general like validation or acceptance from other black women. And I kind of feel like kind of you can't, like, I'm going back to, you can't personalize stuff, and you have to take what you can get and be appreciative of what you have. And you can't always be in that sense, and I'm not saying that in the sense of settling or allow people to disrespect you or be mean to you, but you can't pander to people or try to win over every bee with honey. Like, you know what I mean? You just can't spend your time doing that. People, I'd rather be respected. I'd rather have people respect me. You don't have to like me or want to be around me or like what the fuck I'm saying, but you gonna respect my shit. You know what I mean? And I'm gonna be honest with you, I have noticed that that's the difference between me and other light skinned women. Other light skinned women, they want to be liked and they want to be validated. You just need to respect me. I don't really give a fuck about what you think about me. If you want to be my friend, if you gonna think I look good regardless, so that doesn't really matter. So I don't need a bunch of validation, because I can validate myself. So you gonna respect me. It's like, for me, it's about being respected. And so I think that that's kind of where the difference between the light skinned pick me's and the other light skinned people that's kind of just like, listen, I'm just saying how I feel, because I want my position and who I am to be respected. And that's kind of why I feel like the what I'm trying to do with this type of with talking about this topic. Like, I'm not talking about these topics because I want validation for being light skinned, or I want to be told nice things because I'm light skinned. I'm talking about these topics because I'm saying, no, you gonna fucking respect us, period. I'm not Tandie Newton. I'm not gonna get on the internet and cry. Okay, that's just not me. So yeah, it comes off as a little pick me and a little lack of self-evolved, just being honest with you. But I appreciate her vulnerability as well, even though I do feel like going about it in that way did come off that way. I also don't think that it's anything wrong with being vulnerable at the same time, and I do think that that is good for light skinned women to be straight up about how they feel and how things have hurt them, and be a person. There's nothing wrong with that. So I don't think you should let that, like, toxic, anti-social, anti-emotionality, anti-love, mindset of the black community, keep you from being vulnerable or expressing emotions, because that's definitely something I've noticed that's kind of perpetuated. So one of the things that stood out to me about what Thandi said is that she wants to apologize for quote unquote being the one that's chosen, and connecting it to how her mother is a black woman, and on the darker hue spectrum. And so I want to talk about like light skin guilt and her having a dark skinned mother. And so I thought that was really interesting, because I have two brown skin mixed parents, so that's not really something I can like directly relate to. But I do think that that's really interesting when you have a daughter that is light skin or ambiguous, and then she has a dark skinned mother. I am interested about how these conversations online impact them, and how you all feel about like this discourse, and people saying that you are erasing women that look like your mother, and trying to make it seem like it's an intentional thing. Like, I can definitely see how that can be not only hurtful but also confusing, because especially if you are, Tandie Newton is a lot older than me. She's old enough to be my mother, but even if you're old enough to be my age or even Tandie's age, most likely if you were raised as a biracial girl, you were raised to see yourself as a black girl, just because of the time period and the mentality of the black community at that time. So to grow up and then, being told that, and then by your mother who looks, you know, the way Tandie Newton's mother does, and then you're interacting with other black girls and they're saying, no, I don't know what's going on with you, but you not like us, you know. I think I definitely see how that could be really confusing. But I can see how if you're a light-skinned biracial girl who's half white and your mother is a dark-skinned African woman, I can absolutely see how you could feel that way. So I do feel like in that sense, it could kind of be different from maybe MGMs and biracials in that sense, especially depending on where you grow up and how your parents look and what culture they come from. I think all of that can impact. One thing a few things she said that I can absolutely agree with, though, that I've definitely felt, that she mentioned that it's been hurtful for her to feel or to observe other black women say that she thinks that they feel like she's like taking their image or taking, quote unquote, taking their men or you know, taking their truth. I'm gonna first talk about the taking the image and taking the truth thing. I already touched on like how it's probably very confusing and frustrating to be told one thing your entire life and then grow up and then be told another thing by society. And I think that people have a miscommunication that biracial women being told, you know, or maybe coming into the world and thinking that they will be not accepted as black, but accepted as part of the group in the sense of the culture. I don't think that's them thinking that they're not biracial. I think that you're going into it thinking, okay, well, I was raised seeing that this was my group of people, so if I go hang out with them, even being mixed, it shouldn't really be a problem. I don't think that they're thinking that they're 100% black because you see a white parent. I mean, if I didn't even have a white parent and I knew I was mixed, I don't think that biracial people don't know that they're mixed. I think that you're being told, especially if you grew up in a certain time period, you're being told by the entire society that that's what group you fall in. So I do think that it's really unfair to then turn around randomly in 2018 and say, oh no, you're erasing me and and you know, I don't see myself in you and you can't play my roles. And it's like, you spent the last almost 100 years shaming these same people if they dare to even acknowledge that they had any type of non-black ancestry or, you know, that they were half white or whatever it is. So I think that it's really facetious to then turn around and then be offended and mad at Tandie Newton when she's expressing her confusion with the situation. Because I definitely see where she's coming from. So yeah, I really don't think that that's fair. And I also do I can understand that too, especially if your mother is black and you were being raised being told certain things. I can also see how that would be hurtful too. I can definitely imagine that as a biracial woman who has a darker skinned African mother, I can definitely understand how there would be a level of guilt and also frustration with hearing women who do look like your mother and are your mother's, you know, part of your mother's group, saying that not only do you not represent them, but you feel they might feel slighted by you or that they feel like you're taking something from them. I can definitely see how that could definitely fuel a lot of perhaps self-hatred or just feeling guilty or feeling sad about that, feeling rejected in a way. I definitely can understand that. And I understand, and my mother is black too. I have two black parents as opposed to, you know, one black parent, but I guess because I don't know. I guess maybe because I don't have my white ancestors, like they're not in my life. I guess I don't feel that like kind of duality in the same way. I kind of feel like things just kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind for me. So it's not that I don't like acknowledge colorism or I don't feel like you know, that it's something that I can be empathetic with or that I can't relate with. It's not that I don't feel that way, but I don't feel like the same like amount of guilt just because of how I was raised and like how I was raised up around mostly like light skinned and brown skinned people and Hispanic people. I feel like that's where a lot of that comes from. But I can see how with the juxtaposition of being a biracial woman and having an African mother, I could see how that could be very challenging to navigate. And I feel like that's actually something that's never talked about because the narrative is often, and this is a whole video on its own, I shouldn't even go off in this tangent, but it is relevant. I think that the narrative is often, especially online, that, and I've only heard this online, that black women raise biracial children better because black women understand like the nuances of race and blackness and stuff like that more. And of course, because I'm a black woman myself, I understand where that idea is coming from, because white people just are not raised up to have to deal with these racial topics. So if you're then raising a biracial child of color and all of this stuff is new to you, you're going to struggle whether you're the mother or the father. But the thing about it is that mothers are always the primary caretakers. So it becomes this comparison between black mothers and white mothers. And that's a whole video in itself. And I don't even like that comparison or that whole conversation. But I understand why it makes sense why people would assume that black women are always the best parents for biracial kids. But as a multi-generationally mixed person who has two parents, I'm going to be honest with you. I do think that black women are able to instill a sense of like racial pride and being a person who's a POC and, things of that nature. And like, you, especially when you're a daughter, you look up to your mother. If your mother's a woman of color living in the society, you're going to have a different experience than a biracial girl that's looking up to a white woman who's your mother. So there's all of those gender and racial dynamics come into play. But at the same time, a monoracial black woman of any skin tone, but especially not a brown skin or dark skin woman, cannot teach a light skinned biracial child about what their experience will be like navigating the world. A monoracial black woman cannot teach a biracial woman or cannot prepare a biracial woman for what she's going to experience in the world. It's just the reality. You just can't do that. So I never understood really why like it was this like cut and dry, like black women are the best. And it's like humans are humans. People are going to always have their own baggages, their own traumas, their own issues, their own, hang-ups. And you don't even have to have that. But if you're in any situation where you're having a child who does not look like you, there are always going to be certain things you don't understand or certain challenges. It just is what it is. Granted, black women have been having biracial kids for a long time, so it's not really a thing in the same way as it used to be. But I'm gonna be honest with you, I feel like millennials and Gen Z have turned it into a thing because the dynamics are different than they were historically. So now they want to start with this like tit for tat comparison stuff between like black women and white women having biracial kids, because now there's a whole different dynamic amongst interracial dating and mixed kids and in that conversation, stuff like that. And I'm gonna just be honest with you, as an MGM person who comes from these like old light skinned bloodlines of mixed people, like honestly, I don't even feel like I can even like relate or speak to that conversation, because I feel like very disconnected to that, because I feel like that's not an MGM conversation. Like I feel like the issues and the conversations that are happening between like modern day biracial people and their black parent and their white parents, and like those dynamics, and like how like some people be trying to sling mud between like black mothers and white mothers and go back and forth, because even some mixed people will try to play into that and do that and triangulate each other against that in that way as well. I feel like honestly I don't really speak on that, because I feel like that's not really something that really I can't really speak on. That's a newer dynamic that I can't speak on. What was going on in the past was a completely different dynamic when it came to black women having mixed kids. But anyway, coming back to Tandie Newton, Tandie Newton, we can kind of look at her experience as kind of like a control group, because she didn't even grow up in the United States. She grew up in like rural England. Her mom is not even African American. Her mom's like, from the continent. So, it's interesting that even when Tandie Newton was vulnerable, she said her experiences, she said how she feels, she tried to be empathetic, she tried to be apologetic, she tried to do her best to extend an olive branch, and she honestly did exactly what a lot of these people who believe that black women are the best parents for biracial kids, she did exactly what they told as being the quote unquote better biracial kid. They always say, oh, black women's biracial kids are better because they have more respect for black women and they acknowledge their blackness and they have more respect for black culture and they understand the culture, blah, 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 which is very interesting, because the same people who will use that argument and say that black women's biracial kids are better because they understand the culture more, these are the same type of black people who believe that mixed people are not black. So if you believe that mixed people are not black, why does it matter that they understand the culture or that they have all this respect and reverence for blackness if you say that they're not black anyway? And then for you weirdo mixed people who perpetuate these same ideas that you've internalized from black people who are confused their damn self, for y'all who believe this shit, why do y'all then go super hard to try to go out y'all way to pander to black people and insert yourself into black spaces, and then y'all turn around and say, in a pandering way, because y'all don't even really believe that shit. And then y'all say, oh, well, I'm not black. Okay, then why don't you just go do your own thing then? Why don't you go talk to other mixed people? Why don't you talk to MGMs? Why don't you talk to light skinned people? Why y'all always like, basically meddling in dark skinned black people's business and being their, parrot basically? But then you turn around and say you're not black. And then the same people who support y'all, the black people that tend to support y'all, they say y'all not black either. But then they also want you to pander to them. Like, the whole dynamic just doesn't make any sense. So anyway, going back to Thandie Newton, she basically did exactly what they say they want biracial people, specifically women, to do. And then look how when she was vulnerable and did that, they still turned on her and talked shit about her and dragged her for an entire week. And it's like, what happened? I thought y'all said that black women raise biracial kids that are more self-aware, more understanding, that y'all like them better and that y'all embrace them more. Clearly y'all do not. Because Thandie Newton got the same treatment that y'all would have given to a biracial girl who had a white mama. And in that case, y'all would have just been, dragging her mama in the same way and dragging Thandie at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, she still would have gotten dragged either or. So I never bought into that or believed that whole they accept black women's biracial kids more and that they like them better and blah blah blah. I never believed that bullshit, and I always knew that was a lie, because literally I'm a descendant of black women's biracial kids in slavery, and even then it was still problems. Even then they were still complaining about light-skinned kids, still complaining about light-skinned people's mentalities, saying that mixed people think that they're better, calling us tragic mulattoes and house slaves and stuff. They've been complaining about light-skinned and mixed people for over 200 years. So even when black women were the only people for the most part having biracial kids, y'all still were complaining. So please, cut it out. No, it's just a way for y'all to triangulate mixed people against each other, and an excuse for y'all to talk shit and bash biracial people and try to exclude the vast majority of them, because y'all know the vast majority of them in modern era do have black fathers. So it gives y'all an excuse to be prejudiced about them, prejudiced towards them, by going on a smear campaign against them and their families. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there's not a lot of issues amongst black men, white women relationships and a lot of biracial families. But actually, as somebody who grew up around a lot of black women who are in interracial relationships, you can honestly apply a lot. There were a lot of issues going on in like the 80s, 90s, and those black woman, black white man relationships also. There was a lot of toxicity as well. There's always been a lot of toxicity between interracial relationships and black people in this country. It just is what it is. So, you know what I mean? Like, don't y'all know how I feel about black men and how dysfunctional they are. So I don't even need to get into that in this video. But yeah, it's just like, let's be fucking for real here. I feel like there's a lot of like, I don't know, a lot of performative narratives that go into this conversation. And that's kind of why as an MGM, I kind of stood out of that conversation for a long time. But this whole Thandie Newton situation was just further proof to me that it's really all lip service when they try to triangulate biracials against each other and say that they have a preference for them based on their parent. It's really lip service. So now I want to address this part where Tandie was like, she wants to apologize for maybe black women feeling like she's quote unquote taking their jobs or taking their men or, taking their story. I thought that this was actually very, very interesting, because it also shows me how in tune a lot of these mixed and light-skinned celebrities are with what's going on social media in terms of lightism and anti-mixed rhetoric. I mean, they might not say anything because they know it would be career suicide, but just like Tandie, because Tandie was definitely used as an example. She was held up and spanked in front of everybody, to keep all the other light skins in line. But anyway, keep all the other biracials in check. But anyway, so but yeah, this concept of maybe some monoracial black women feeling like biracial women or mixed women are taking their truth or taking their roles or men, I thought that was interesting phrasing. And I also think that this phrasing is kind of what triggered a lot of people and made them feel like Tandie was being shady, or like just made them hypersensitive about it. I feel like people from other countries, they can be very direct with their words and like what they're saying. And so I don't think she was saying it to try to be like shady or try to be, like I got one up on you. But I think that unfortunately that's how a lot of Americans perceived it, because of the way we culturally communicate, and also because I'm just gonna be honest with you, there's a whole like wrong messenger type of mentality within the black community where like certain people can say stuff and certain people can't, because unfortunately collectively people of color have a self-esteem issue. So when certain things are said by certain messengers, it gets people to be very triggered. And I actually really thought about this most recently with the whole situation of those biracial girls that are in some type of like religious cult or something like that. Which, I mean, if you look, I think they said that they're Mennonite. I'm not sure what that is exactly. Some people were saying they're Amish, but I'm like 90% sure they're not Amish, because how would they be biracial if they're Amish? So anyway, the anthropologist in me is coming out. But anyway, so yeah, there was like these biracial girls that are in some type of like religious cult, and they literally wear all black. But I didn't feel like they were trying to be malicious. I didn't feel like they were trying to be anti-black women. I didn't feel like they were trying to be colors or anything like that. I didn't feel like it had anything to do with race or mixedness. I feel like they were literally just talking, and based on how they were talking, it sounded like they considered themselves black women too. So I didn't perceive it as like, oh, these women who consider themselves to be, you know, different or better or whatever are talking about black women. Like, I didn't perceive it that way at all. I just perceived it as they're conservative women giving their perspective on women who are not conservative. That's how I interpreted it. I thought it was really interesting that a lot of people perceived it as like, oh, these biracial girls are talking shit about black women. It wasn't perceived in a way like these are conservative religious women talking about women who are secular, which is what the conversation actually was.
Looked into those black Amish girls, and they're not Amish. They're actually part of a Christian ministry called Church of God Restoration. It's basically a cult. Honestly, they believe that they have apostles and prophets, and they believe that those people can rewrite scripture, like write new scripture. They also believe that to change systematic racism, that one of their prophets needs to go back in time to fix that. And that the only people that can fix things like that are prophets, because prophets can go back in time. So yeah, at this point, anything that they say about black women and their hair, I feel like they have a lot more problems that they need to deal with, like getting out of the cult. Like, call your dad, okay? Actually, their dad's in the cult, so I don't know. Somebody help those girls. They're very, very young, so I don't think let's not troll them or anything, but they're in a cult. They're in a very serious cult. They're spewing a lot of crap. They also talked about how, in one of their podcasts, they also talked about how Candace Owen would have been a better president than Kamala Harris. End of story. Honestly, like, they've been brainwashed.
And this is going to sound touche, but I honestly think it's interesting that the negativity is what went viral. But when they said that in your words, unambiguous dark-skinned black woman like Candace Owens, when they said that Candace Owens would be a better president than Kamala Harris, that didn't go viral. But negative stuff or triangulation always goes viral. So I think that that's very interesting as well. It's definitely a lot of rage porn when it comes to these situations, and a lot of reactionism when it comes to like a lot of light-skinned and biracial women on social media. And I just find that to be really interesting. But yeah, I thought it was interesting that that woman pointed that out. But anyway, going back to Tandie Newton regarding the whole like her saying I apologize about like stealing your work or stealing your man, I thought it was really interesting that a lot of black women were like, oh, what is she talking about? Who said she was taking anything? We don't want nothing you have, da 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 da. You're not taking nobody's man because you're with a white man and this and that, which I'm gonna come to that in a second. But with the whole like taking your roles or taking your man or taking your truth, I found it hilarious how they were trying to gaslight and make it seem like they don't understand where Tandie Newton is coming from with that, or why she said that, when literally all over social media for the past over 6 years, black women have been, you know, trying to draw these comparisons between how black women are treated based on skin tone, and trying to perpetuate this idea that if you're a certain skin tone, you're not going to have the certain opportunities, or you're going to be perceived XYZ way and this and that, basically projecting all of these assumptions and ideas onto other black women about each other's skin tones, and it's not healthy. So it's like you actually literally have been running around social media saying this for a very long time. And not only that, let's go to the casting role thing. Y'all have literally been directly addressing biracial women who are actresses about roles for a very, very, very long time. So why are you now acting surprised and playing coy talking about, oh, I don't want nothing she has? And I'm not even saying that other black women do want what Tandie has. But I'm just saying, if you're constantly talking about biracial actresses like Zendaya and all these other girls and say, oh, it's not fair that they get these roles because they're light skinned XYZ, then when Tandie Newton is, boo-boo tearsing and apologizing for it and acknowledging that too, why is it a problem when she's repeating the same thing y'all been complaining about? Like, I never understood that. So that was another thing that really confused me about the whole situation. It's like, she's actually acknowledging what you've been saying, and you actually have literally been saying that, though. You literally have been saying that she's stealing your roles and stealing your jobs. You literally have been saying that, though, specifically about biracial women. So she's addressing what you're saying. So it's pure gaslighting. So it's like, they want to be able to address the issue, but when you address the issue, now they're offended because you addressing the issue. So you just shouldn't address the issue and just didn't say anything, or sit in your corner and speak your piece. That's what I do. And then with the whole taking your men part of it, I thought it was funny that she said it like that. Like, Brits are so funny. Like, Brits are hilarious. But anyway, man, it's like they be shady without even trying to be shady, because Tandie was not trying to be shady at all. But it's like, girl. Anyway, I love Tandie. But anyway, so the only reason she even threw that part about the whole quote unquote taking your men part is because she's been with a white man and because she probably dates white men. Light skin and mixed women who actually date brown skin and dark skin men, because they actually have a level of guilt about it, they never want to have a real acknowledgement or conversation. Rarely. Some of them will, don't get me wrong, some of them will. I want to be clear, I'm not trying to generalize, but a lot of them have a very difficult time having a conversation about the dynamic that we are in. They will try to deflect it onto the other woman. They'll try to say it's all these other people, it's green Martians, it's leprechauns, it's this and that. Or they'll just full on take accountability for the man's actions and behavior and completely apologize for these men being colorist and try to take responsibility for the man. I see it going either way. I personally feel like, as a light-skinned woman who interracially dates and who's dated all groups of men, I personally feel like when you've dated all groups of men, you don't feel a reason to feel guilty about acknowledging what the reality is, because by that time you've understood that the reality that black people are trying to push when it comes to colorism is not the reality of the world. It's the reality in their culture or our culture. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the reality all over the world. The whole world does not view skin tone and black women through the lens that black people view skin tone and view race. And where black women start to feel limited and start to feel insecure and start to feel like they can't grow and start to have their self-esteem slowly shattered away at, is honestly when they listen to black people and when they're internalizing what black people say. Black people do not live in the minds of every other group of people in the world. They did not have a consensus in a forum going around asking the rest of the world and asking other groups of men how they feel about black women and how they feel about black women's skin tones. Most non-black people don't even view skin tone in the same way, or view the spectrum of range, wouldn't even view somebody as light skin or dark skin in the same way black people do. These stereotypes that perpetuate in black media and things like that, those are not the same sentiments of the outside world. So that being said, when you've dated other groups of men and you've been around other cultures and you were even perhaps raised up in another culture, you already know these things. So you don't have to walk around with so much guilt. So you don't have to. So I feel like Tandie Newton acknowledged that and said that because she knows that that's not really what she's trying to do, but she knows what's really up. She knows what's really going on and how things really are. As where I feel like, honestly, a lot of light-skinned and mixed women who date brown-skinned and dark-skinned men, I feel like they get defensive and they feel guilty because they genuinely feel like they're stealing brown-skinned and dark-skinned women's men. Like, I really do feel like they feel like that. I really do feel like they really believe what the black community is telling them. I think that they do, because for you to genuinely live in this society, especially with the context of like historical context of how women of African descent have been treated, if you've traveled anywhere past the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean, you already know that these talks of like light skin privilege and texturism and all this other bullshit that black people talk about really doesn't apply in the real world. So you don't have to run around with all this guilt and talking about it all the time. Like, it's the women who have internalized what black people say who talk about this stuff. Let's just be real here. So you're not going to apply the colorism conversation to your white boyfriend or your, Mexican boyfriend, because it's just not the same dynamic. So you don't have to feel guilty. So that's just my tangent. But you can tell that the women who got offended by what Tandie said, these are black men worshipers who did feel some type of way, because in one breath they'll complain about black men being colorist and they'll complain about the racial dynamic, the skin tone dynamic in the Black community, and they'll try to make light-skinned women feel guilty and try to hold all these like guilt-tripping tactics and story times and, you know, accusations over light-skinned women's head. But then when a light-skinned woman says, hey, listen, I'm sorry about this dynamic, I apologize, I acknowledge what's going on, I acknowledge how colorist these men are, I'm sorry if you feel like I'm quote unquote stealing your man, hey, I acknowledge what's happening, then they turn around and they get offended and they get hyper defensive and feel some type of way and say, oh no, you're not taking my man, you're not, that's not happening, that's not what's going on, da 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 da. Because pick-me's cannot feel like another woman is getting one up on them when it comes to a man, even if it's not true, even if the woman is just saying it like in a hypothetical or just speaking general. A pick-me cannot handle another woman thinking that. So she has to feel like, no, you're not getting one up on me. No, everything's fine. So it's like in one breath, they want to be able to hold that over light-skinned woman's head and make light-skinned women feel guilty about colorism. But then in the next breath, to Tandie Newton, they saying, oh, that's not what's going on. That's not happening. We don't even care. Okay, if you don't even care, then why has this been a conversation going on for the past 6-7 years and honestly longer? It just doesn't make any sense. And so before I wrap this video up, I want to make a few points about something else that Tandie Newton said later in the interview, where she was saying how she's from England, and it seems like she grew up in like a rural part of England. And I've also heard that a lot of people who are like Gen Xers, maybe even boomers that were like descendants of like Caribbeans, like the Windrush generation, are in very populated areas, and they still have to deal with a lot of racism, even though the UK doesn't have it as systematic and as embedded in their history on the island. Don't get me wrong, of course they've colonized fucking everywhere, tried to enslave damn near everybody, but on the island they got England, they got rid of slavery a lot earlier. They didn't have the same racial laws and stuff like that, but they still did have a lot of anti-blackness and prejudice and stuff. And so a lot of those people would live in like the city parts. So the fact that Tandie Newton grew up in the rural area, that to me, that says something, and that shows that she grew up in a certain, with white people that grew up in a certain mentality. So this was like the 70s and 80s. They probably had never been around black people, mixed people, non-whites of any kind. So anyway, so something she goes on to mention is that when she was living in England, she considered herself to be dark skinned. Like she was seen as basically black because she was the only person of color probably in her area or town or whatever. And I think that that's a common misconception about like, places like the UK or like other places where there is no one drop rule. I think that people think that, how do I describe this? How can I say this? Because this is not what I want this video to be about. But where I disagree with the people who feel like the one drop rule is what makes white people view mixed people as black, I know that it's hypodescendence. That's the scientific, social science term that you would use for what the one drop rule is. It's called hypodescendence. Look it up. So hypodescendence, yes, it is racism, but it's also assigning a person of color to be a part of the non-white parents group because you're non-white. So they're basically saying, well, you're not white anymore, so you can't be white, so you're an other. That's what it is. Not even choosing, whether you're a monoracial white person or a monoracial black person, that is respect. Acknowledging a mixed person as mixed is respecting a mixed person's autonomy, identity, who they are. So part of racism is white people choosing to not acknowledge mixed people's full identity, humanity, who you are, being part of them, etc. That's what that is. And it's an intentional choice of racism. So if you know that it's an intentional choice of racism and you are applying that to a society like England where everybody's white and they may not have ever interacted with a mixed person or a black person before, I don't know why y'all think that these countries that don't have a one drop rule are just so accepting of mixed people, and they're just so acknowledging of mixed people's identity, and they're just so embracive, and they just let mixed people live their best lives and identify the way they want to. And it's like, I agree that there's not as much pressure to choose a race or to align yourself with a certain race like in the United States, I completely agree with that. But this whole idea that hypodescendance doesn't exist in other countries is delusional. Not only is it delusional, it's just non-factual, and it also goes against what a lot of mixed people already say. So it's like you're choosing to ignore what other mixed people are telling you because you want to live this fantasy that you can go to other countries and escape your blackness, which is essentially what that talking point is about. But anyway, again, I keep getting off on tangents. But anyway, that being said, Tandie Newton said that in England, because of where she grew up, she saw herself as darker skinned, as, black, as clearly non-white, as she's not. And I can kind of relate to that to an extent, that I've spoken about how like I'm mixed as well, and so I grew up partially in the Hispanic community also, and so I was kind of taught something similar as well, to where I was taught that I was on like the brown side, like not necessarily dark skinned, but I was definitely considered like brown, not light skin at all. So I understand how that can be, of going from one culture or one society that treats you as darker skinned, and then you go to another culture and they treat you as light skinned. Because what Tandie Newton would go on to say is that when she came to the United States and she started looking for roles and interacting with black people here, she would describe herself as dark skinned or, whatever. And they would correct her and say, what? Like, you're light skinned. Like, and she started having to deal with that when it came to casting roles and having, dealing with skin tone dynamics with other black women. So I thought that was really interesting. So she basically had to learn about being light skinned and learn about that racial dynamic and learn about the skin tone politics within the Black American community. And so I thought that was really interesting. And I also think that could be why she was a lot more vulnerable to share about how her experience was and how she felt about things, because I feel like when you're like raised up in it from the time you're a wee bit pea, like I am, or even like other multi-ethnic people or light-skinned people who just grew up in the United States, when you're like kind of already conditioned into it, it can be very difficult to be vulnerable or to be honest about your feelings. But I do feel like maybe mixed and light-skinned people from other countries, they might have an easier time being vulnerable or being like really more transparent about what they've been through, because they don't have that sense of guilt instilled into them. And I've kind of talked about how like even amongst Hispanics, like Afro-Latinos don't teach your kids to be like guilty in like your skin tone or like feeling light skin or being light skin or anything like that. And like the whole like light skin, dark skin, house slave, field slave narrative is not a thing in like the Caribbean or Latin America. That's not to say that colorism doesn't exist, but it's just not in the same way. So I feel like the history in the United States and like the way the different skin tones of women have been triangulated amongst each other in the cultural narrative, I feel like that plays a huge role in these issues, and that's why I'm always addressing it. And I thought that was really interesting that she found it really confusing to deal with both of those dynamics, and she really had to like adjust her mindset to thinking differently. And I could totally believe what she was saying, because I remember when this happened, and I remember reading the comment section, and there were a lot of people saying, oh, I don't believe that she ever believed she was dark skinned, like she's lying, blah blah blah, nobody would ever call her dark skinned. And I thought that was really funny. And it also shows that like if you don't grow up around like interacting or being in non-black spaces, specifically like white spaces, or like with other people of color that are just a different race, and they have their own skin tone ranges and stuff like that, how different those dynamics can be. And it goes back to what I was saying by that the black community does not know how every group of people in the world thinks. So you can't apply what you're being told when it comes to skin tone politics to every group of people and assume that they think that way also, because they don't. Like, I've been called dark skinned by Russian people. I've been called dark skinned by non-black Hispanic people. I would be considered a morena. Growing up, I was always told that I was a morena. Different names. Even I've been called like Indio, which is more of a Dominican term. Lots of different things. But yeah, like, so you can call me so in different groups, you might be perceived in different ways. So that also gives you different perspectives on skin tone politics. But yeah, that's not uncommon for white people to call somebody that's like me or Tandie Newton color, because we're about the same skin tone. It's not uncommon for white people or non-black people to call somebody like us dark. And it's not that they literally think that we're dark skinned like Lupita Nyong'o or I know what Yek. It's not that they think that we're actually dark skinned. Is that basically because you're not white skinned, basically because you're not yeah, because you have a tan to you, because you have color in your skin, because you're brown, because you're not super pale or white skinned, like, you know, a China glass or something, because you're not like that, they consider it to be darker, because they'll even call a tanned white person dark. They'll even call, you know, a swarthy European, like an Italian or something, they'll call them dark. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, I'm just going to wrap this video up. That's really all I had to share regarding this topic. Shout out again to my supporter, sweet girl, who's left a lot of great comments. I appreciate your support and presence on the channel. Thanks again for recommending this topic. I definitely think it was important to revisit. So shout out to you. And you guys get in the comment section and let me know what y'all thought about this video. Did you relate or agree or disagree with any of the things that I mentioned in regards to Tandie's take regarding skin tone politics in Black America? So get in the comment section and let me know what you thought about this Tandie Newton apology review. Thanks for all the support. Peace.